Brought to you by Prescient Investment Management. Informed by science, guided by insight. Prescient Investment Management is an authorized FSP.
Welcome to another episode of Honest Money. We're talking about a subject that's really close to my heart today, and I think also close to the heart of a lot of our listeners and people around the world who who kind of feel that their money and their values need to align much more now than they did in the past. And I certainly can't claim to be an expert on this topic. I think it's a fast evolving, very diverse, very complicated field of investing. So I'm really thrilled to be joined by Michelle Green. So Michelle Green is the credit analyst and chair of the ESG committee at Prescient Investment Management. Michelle, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Warren. I look forward to our conversation today.
So there is this phrase that's being bandied about for the last few years, and it's ESG. So I thought before we get into the depth of the topic, can we just do some jargon busting? What is ESG?
So ESG, simply put, the E stands for environmental, the S for social, and the G for governance. So effectively, ESG, it's basically a set of standards that you'd look at for any company where investors use these kind of criteria, the environmental, social, and governance, to be able to screen for investment opportunities. That's simply put, yeah.
Okay, and so not to put words in your mouth, but my view on this is, for a long time, investors have been looking for ways to kind of put their money to work so that it does give them capital growth. I mean, that's why we invest. But secondly, that it doesn't get allocated to things that are in conflict with their own personal values. So I think that for me, this ESG is an important thing to kind of find ways that we feel good about the way that our money is being invested, and not just make a profit at the detriment of whether it's child labor overseas, or to the detriment of the environment, or with corrupt political leaders, etc. And I'm guessing all of this is encapsulated in the world of ESG.
Yes, certainly. I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's about looking at you as an investor. What does it actually align to your values? Is this company actually taking things seriously? Are they actually measuring impact and how they impact, like you said, the environment, considering things that they can put in place that will, whether it be policies, for example, putting that in place to bring about change. On the social front, how inclusive is the workforce? Are they actually employing, young individuals? Is there diversity, for example, bringing in more women into boardrooms, for example? Is it reflective of the communities or the customers that you are attracting? So I think it's about making sure that, does it actually align, like you said, to what you want ultimately? Do you want to put your money where it's also impacting directly and indirectly, and then making a decision based on that?
So let's maybe get to the kind of the hard-nosed part of investing. If someone's kind of old school and all about the bottom line, they would say, "Gee, if I invest my money this way, I mean, I don't want to kind of sacrifice growth." So does ESG come at the cost of capital growth, or is there kind of an analysis to say there's actually no difference, or actually, you might even make more money? I've never really been able to get that clear in my mind. Are we giving away some lost growth by following this, or is it actually purely financially also a good decision?
So, yes, this is certainly one of the questions that keep popping up. There's such a lot of research that's been done to specifically answer this question. And the answer, if I look at the research that's been shown, is certainly that companies that do incorporate ESG practices or standards, it does lead to sustainability. So it does actually impact the bottom line being your profit. So it does lead to capital growth over over a long time, hence sustainability, right? It needs to be sustainable. So it's not just a tick box approach for now, but put in place practices and policies and change so that over the long run, capital growth can take place, profitability can take place. And that is, for example, if you invest in solar. So we all know the crisis of energy that is going on in the country right now, where South Africa is, one of the highest emitters in globally. And so as companies, you need to look at yourself. There's load shedding going on right now. As a business, you cannot operate if you don't have power. Customers can't pay for their bills or whatever the case. So your operations literally go to a standstill. And so businesses have to look at how we can become sustainable, less reliant on one source of energy, for example, and let's invest that right now. So putting in the solar, yes, it will have cost implications now, but over the long term, if you think about it, they will start reaping the benefits because they can be operational. Imagine having to go to a mall and you're doing a monthly shopping, you can't pay for your basket of goods, and you have to come back. It's such an inconvenience. It stops everything. It puts the consumer, or the client rather, not wanting to go back. And so businesses is a lot more attractive if they can put practices in place that will sustain them over the long term. So the question that you ask, does it actually bring profits over the long term, or is it profitable? Yes, it is. There's studies, like I said, if you do, for example, include ESG practice, there's been studies that's shown actually just on the gender, if I can give you an example of gender inclusivity. If companies actually get a lot more diversity within their boardrooms or even across the business, this can increase profits up to 10%. And that study's been shown that, for example. So yeah, it's mind-blowing. But ultimately, so there's lots of research that's being done. And obviously, it's not a short-term game, but rather a sustainable one that will lead to long-term profits.
And just for myself as an investor, I mean, I like to think of or find companies that I can invest in where the management team are not looking at the next quarter or the next 6 months and trying to maximize, everything for just the next 3 months or next 6 months. They've got a multi-year or even multi-decade view where they want to take long-term decisions for the benefit of their shareholders over long periods of time, and not just for the next, quarterly bonus for the management team. And always for me, that's the concept I think of where ESG as a theme does align with long-term investment values. The two can overlap very significantly because a management team that really seriously think about sustainability, they have to have a multi-year view. They can't just be worried about the next quarter and to take a little bit of a knock, financially in a quarter because you're investing using your example of sustainable power, but whether it's diversity in the workplace or, whether it's finding new supply chains because, the previous supply chains were compromised, to the detriment of the labor force that were being used, whatever the deal is. I think all of those are about long-term thinking. And that to me, logically, a good management team with the long-term focus will always outperform, a very short-term focused management team. So I love that. You chair an ESG committee. Maybe just to kind of give us an idea, when you're in an investment management business, how can you drive this? What does a committee like that do? Are you kind of picking up the phone to, let's not name drop names of companies, but a big petrol company and say, look, I need you to fix yourself or you're out, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it certainly does become a tricky one to enforce change, right? But I think ultimately we in a position where we manage money, so we have to take the onus on us because that it's a part of our beliefs and it's driven in our core to bring about change. Ultimately, like I mentioned, over the long run, it's going to have positive impact. To see these companies actually bring about this change, to be able to see sustainable companies over the long run, and the way in which we as a committee then do it is we not only involved in chatting to industry bodies, for example, that has the same goals as us wanting to see that change, wanting to see them actually report better, actually put measures in place, like how are you actually, it's asking the tough questions. How are you managing waste, for example? So like you mentioned, supply chains. Companies that uses oil as part of their manufacturing to get the final products through. What happens with that oil waste? What happens to, how are you saving water? This is literally, there's lots of media around, about water crisis. And so it's about how are you smartly using the resources that we have, and then what are you actually investing in? For example, like the power, are you investing in solar? Are you being less reliant on our power supply? Ultimately, how are you making your business a lot more sustainable? And also asking the tough questions about how are you actually bringing diversity within your business? Like, is it a tick box approach, or are you actually measuring it? And are there goals in place? What are your targets? Ultimately, what we want specifically in South Africa is to see that inclusivity, is to see a lot more women of color, a lot more people in management positions making those decisions. And ultimately, it's about asking those tough questions and putting targets in place. So as a committee, what we do is to engage with them. So it's a matter of picking up the phone or having a conversation like we're having now, and actually holding these companies accountable. Ultimately, that's where it stems down to. So it's not about they say they will do it, but actually measuring it year on year. Like, you said you're going to implement this over 3 years. Have you done it? And that ultimately keeps them also accountable to know that we are watching. We want to see that change. And I think the more investors ask the tough questions, I think it puts them in the hot seat to know that, things need to start changing. This is important. And ultimately, this is our money. We want to know that our money is being put to use in a not only positive, but also in a sustainable, responsible way.
Yeah, and I think it felt to me when this became more and more of a theme in the early days, it was sort of the investment managers and especially company management, they were kind of going, this is just a fashion, and it's just the youngsters, they'll move on to something else, and it feels to me maybe a decade later that it's now ingrained, certainly in the broadest investment management industry right across the world. It's not a fashion anymore. It's not, can't say that it's core to a lot of philosophies, but even listening to some of the the big company management teams, that they are taking it seriously. If they weren't before, they're feeling the pressure from every direction, including when they get home and their teenage children are asking them what they're doing. They don't want to read about their parents in the newspaper getting behaving badly, whether it's environmentally or socially, etc. So I think it's a key thing. And maybe the one comment that you made, which I just want to highlight, is, I think in the early days we were a bit too absolute in our views around ESG. In other words, if there was let's use a foreign company, an oil company overseas, and they just did oil. Then you would say, well, the kind of the theme was, well, just avoid them, blockade them, or whatever it is, boycott them, and any fund manager or any pension fund or anybody that's doing business with them, just blockade them. And I think it's that sort of thinking has evolved a lot to say, hang on, if that energy company is investing heavily in building renewable energy, whether it's solar and wind, and finding clever ways to come up with storage solutions and new sources of renewable energy, rather support the company to change faster than just sort of ignore them and boycott them. And I think that's maybe the one comment for our listeners is, be careful of kind of just doing investment boycotts in a kind of a just a 1 or 0. It's such a binary approach that it's yes or no. I think this this is a really complicated issue, and it is important that we understand there might be some companies that are today quite heavy polluters, or maybe not ranking very well on the broadest sort of ESG measures. However, look at the rate of change. Look at what they're doing, and actually on the ground with large amounts of money, are they moving the needle? Because a massive company that does, $100 million worth of turnover a year, and suddenly they're spending $2 or $3 million of that making big change. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if it becomes a bigger and bigger amount, that moves the needle. And look at Eskom. If Eskom can stop its pollution by 10%, it's a huge amount of pollution. And rather than go and find, a brand new little company that's going to, put up one little solar panel on one little building, which doesn't move the needle at all, that should happen as well. I'm not discarding that. But just for, it's the one, to get off my soapbox, but I just really think we can't have cancel culture here with investing. Yes, we should boycott the companies that are not engaging on this, or that are just kind of resorting to greenwashing, whatever it is. Like, I think that bothers me a lot. But if a company is legitimately hand on heart trying to make a big change, and they've got an old business model that is modernizing, that is moving forward, they should be supported.
I totally agree with you, Warren. Ultimately, our economy as a developing country, we also cannot afford to just totally exclude, for example, these companies. It's about walking the journey with them and building that that sustainable practices in place. To say, it goes to what you're saying in terms of what are you putting in place now that will ultimately benefit us in the long run. And the way I like to think about it is, yes, it's about bringing in the right partnerships, right? And investing. So, for example, like you mentioned, Eskom, if they were just to shave off a portion of it, it will make a massive difference. I mean, we as South Africa, according to Bloomberg, is actually the world's 12th biggest source of greenhouse gases, and Eskom being the one contributing source and another. But ultimately, we all know that we rely so heavily on coal to bring us that energy. And so bringing in renewable energy sources and investing right now will ultimately be better for generations to come. It's about how you're investing in the infrastructure right now that will set us better for generations. It's not only about now, it's about how can we improve not only the economy, but how are we going to improve, whether it be railway or trains or whatever the case may be. It's about putting in sustainable practices, but investing in the right areas that is needed to bring about positive change. Imagine we didn't have to have, the struggle of, our trains, for example. So it's about ultimately ESG. Why it's also important is the fact that, it can have financial implications. So there's lots of initiatives in place right now, and ultimately over the long run, you can have financial implications, whether it be, a fine or taxes. So these, companies, they do feel this financially, and ultimately that does impact their profits, and it does erode, capital growth, for example. So it's about being mindful of that and putting actions in place.
And so we're coming to the end of our time, Michelle, and I've got two questions for you. The one I'm going to ask you now, but you can think a little bit about it to give you time. So my favorite question for guests who are new to our show is, if you were to meet let's say your 21-year-old self, what would be the one lesson you would love to give yourself if you could go back and just teach yourself one thing that you've learned with the benefit of experience? Doesn't have to be about money. If it is, that's also great. So that's the one to help you think a little bit, and then staying on this theme for a second, is there something else that you would like our listeners to know about ESG and something we haven't covered yet that we should be telling them?
Sure. I think the key thing is in terms of ESG. So again, look at, companies, not only look at the bottom line, but how is the company actually run? Who's making the decisions at the top? Does it align with your values? You obviously want to invest your money, specifically if you want change. Are you living that? Are you investing your money with companies that align with that? And ultimately, just know the benefits, know the risks. That ESG is a tangible risk. It does lead to financial implications over the long run, and it's important that you look at it with a fine lens, and ask the tough questions if you're in a position to do so, because ESG does lead to benefits. For example, it does give them competitive advantages. A lot more specifically investors wanting to see their money do good. You want change. So that obviously speaks about, where the money is actually going. And that's why it's become a lot more topical as well. I mean, COVID specifically, the pandemic that we just went through or still going through, it highlighted where the inefficiencies lie, the inequalities lie, and ultimately it gave us as an investors, a different lens and to push. That is why ESG is at the forefront now, and a very topical. Sustainability, very topical, is because a lot more investors is wanting to see their money being invested or put to good use in a sustainable way. So it's about knowing the company, asking the tough questions, and does it align with your values? Because ESG is, like I said, it is real and it's here to stay.
Absolutely. I think I wish I could find something to disagree with you on, because we're agreeing on everything. So thank you, Michelle. And then to my final question, the one thing you'd love to tell your younger self.
Yeah. So this one, I've given it thought for a while actually, and the key thing that stands out for me is invest early on. I mean, from a very young age, I used to do other activities to bring in money. But what I did not do is actually explore how I can invest that to bring me capital growth over the long term. And so, it didn't put the money to good use. And so I would definitely, number one would be save as much as you can, but also teach yourself about what other vehicles out there, investment products that can help grow over the long term. Think about retirement. Think about what it is that you want at the end, how you want to, what do you want out of retirement ultimately? What kind of lifestyle do I want? And start early. And ultimately knowledge, so read a lot more. Everything is interconnected. So I think that's ultimately what I would want to tell myself if I was 21, is start early, get into it, learn a lot more, and obviously knowledge is power. So and investing early on is the key. You will set yourself up in a better position, as well as for your kids. If you're planning on having a family, of course, it does ultimately set your future up in a lot more of a comfortable state, specifically in the environment that we are now, in a high interest rate environment. So yes, that's it.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That's Michelle Green. Michelle is a credit analyst at Prescient Investment Management, and also chair of the ESG committee. And in that role, I wish you all the best in helping us get all of our money moving in the right direction to get the world moving in a better direction. I think it's such a critical thing, and as you say, it's here to stay. And really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Brought to you by Prescient Investment Management. Informed by science, guided by insight. Prescient Investment Management is an authorized FSP.